think we'll just get started with some introductions and share with you some things about the FICS Institute. Again, welcome to the webinar, Be the Change, Faculty and Students Stepping Up and Stepping Out, and us just having a conversation tonight about what these wonderful folks are doing in their lives and how they're empowered and inspired to be the change in their own lives and our own culture. I had a quote, I thought, two quotes that I would share. One's a little, I thought it was rather timely given our political polarization nowadays. And it was when I looked up quotes by Gandhi, there's a quote here that says that Mahatma Gandhi said, "What difference does it make to the dead, the orphans, and the homeless, whether the mad destruction is wrought under the name of totalitarianism, thank you, or the holy name of liberty or democracy?" And then I wanted to bookmark that with a beautiful quote by Michelle Obama that we just had our Coria, one of our staff, who put together this beautiful email for us today that should be in your mailbox from Michelle Obama. "You may not always have a comfortable life, and you will not always be able to solve all the world's problems at once, but don't ever underestimate the importance you have, because history has shown us that courage can be contagious and hope can take on a life of its own." I love that part about courage being contagious, because the last webinar we had, surprisingly to me, or at least I just wasn't anticipating the focus, and what evolved from these 6 people joining us and talking about their work in the world and how they were empowered was this theme of courage. And I think that I sort of expect that a little bit, and knowing the people participating in our webinar, that courage, it takes courage to step up and step out. So just to let you know about the process, we're just gonna have a conversation. We've posed to our panelists about 3 questions, so we're trying to keep it simple and to visit around those panelists. And also want to note that Adam Lukey doesn't look like he's going to be able to attend on time because his wife is actually doing her work in the world as part of the legislature in Nebraska, and the legislature is going late, and Adam has the responsibility of childcare. So that was a little, this is the real life work of being in the world. So he may be able to join us later. We're just going to get started with students. It's our faculty that's missing, but our students are here, and how wonderful is that? I really love that. So we're just going to get started and have the faculty join us later. But this is sort of like, I'm always talking about FICS Institute as we, are sort of a new iteration from the University of Creation Spirituality that was in the past and transitioned into a different school in 2006. We're, maybe someone said we're not 2.0, we're 3.0, we're 3.5, but one of the things we are is about the new leadership and supporting the new leadership, both as faculty and then bringing forward that new leadership and supporting and nourishing that new leadership, which are our students. And so I think that's, I'm really excited to talk to you, Pat and Sarita, as I've gotten to know you as students, and to hear your voice and hear your ideas and let you and the work that you're doing shine and share about that. So I just want to introduce you, Patricia Plude, who is the Minister of Music, Arts, and Formation at the Mennonite Church in San Francisco. I'm using several different kinds of notes here. And you are one of our doctoral students at FICS Institute. You're an artist and an activist and a minister, and we've been able to see some of those gifts as you shared them in classes. And you have such an amazing mix of things that you do, and I hope at some point tonight that you'll share that event that you were recently a part of when you did a sit-in, sing-in at a bank in town. I mean, that was a pretty amazing thing that you did, but we really want to learn about your work. And thank you, Pat, for being here. And then also, I want to introduce Sarita Rabard, who is a bicultural, trilingual native of South and North America. And I like in your description, and I want to learn more, Sarita, that says that you're a nomad of 13 years. I hope you'll share more about that. A bridge between many worlds, and you have a project that you have been building and a new book out, Kindling the Fire project, about your belief in creative expression as a tool to heal, transform, empower, and ignite. I really like that part of your vision and mission is about dialoguing across differences. And so that sort of fits in those initial quotes that I shared too, you know, and I think it's such important work that we need to be about today, is that dialogue and bringing together differences. So thank you for being here, Sarita, and thank you for being a part of the school and sharing your voice there. Melissa, can you hear us?
I can hear you, and I
Yay! We're just, you know, it's a variety that happens here when we have technical problems. We're all hanging in there. We're live on Facebook, and we have plenty of time. We can relax into this and enjoy one another and have some conversation. Melissa Michaels is one of our faculty, has joined us in leading a really powerful artist meditation course on movement. I have appreciated Melissa's work and have danced with her on and off. I think my first time was around, I can't remember, it was 1995 or 1998. I also know that you were a part of a cosmic mass and leading a cosmic mass at University of Colorado in, I think that was 1993, and I was at that and didn't know you at that time. So I like the foreshadowing that happened there. Melissa has a Doctorate of Education, and she is the founder of Surfing the Creative, which is rites of creation of passage programs, in addition to a non-for-profit organization, Golden Bridge. And everyone who connects to us is on our mailing list, received email newsletter just before this webinar, and the announcement actually of this webinar. We can put the links, but there's links to Melissa's work. And I share that because that video that you all did about your work, I think is astounding. It's such good work. It's such a great expression of the work you do. So Melissa, welcome. I'm glad that we were able to work through those technical problems.
Thank you, Susan. It's an honor and joy to be here.
Yes, no worries. So like I said, we set a few questions ahead that we can ponder and talk about. And we're actually we're right on time for starting that according to our schedule. We're going to go through that, and at the end, we're going to invite Kip and Carol back, staff at the Fox Institute, so they can share what the Fox Institute's up to. You can get to meet them for any follow-up. So the first question that I put forward to you all was, we're talking about the topic title, which is based on Mahatma Gandhi's quote, "Be the change you want to see in the world." And we actually put that on, like the first tab of our Facebook page when we actually launched the Facebook. It's always, our homepage, website, because and when we talk about programming, if you go there and look at programming, there's that quote, "Be the change," because it's a huge part of what our school is about, is helping people live into that part in their heart that is calling something forward, that and all of us have something else that's laying on our heart that's calling forward our action. And so what I'd like to know is what change especially speaks to your heart and inspires your work in the world. And so Pat and I were talking about, that question's, yes, it's what's on your heart, and then how does that translate to the work that you do? So Melissa, are you willing to take a shot at that first?
Sure. Thank you. So I feel like the answer to that is one that's evolving, always changing in some ways. But originally, I think my call to action stirred from my own personal needs and how they were being mirrored in the world around me. I came to realize that the experience of disconnection, disassociation that I had as a young person was I was seeing all around me, whether it was people growing up in refugee settlements or growing up going to colleges across the United States. I saw such a need for connection and communion, and I had that same need. So my work really originally grew out of my own starvation, my own hunger, my own need for reconnection. And as I found my pathways, my practices, and the principles that really have grown to guide my life, I start to recognize that they were relevant to the people around me. And not only that, the people around me were asking to join me in the activities that were helping me heal my life. And so at the very root, practices that helped me come back into my body and to find my way home, to the ground in my being, the vast intelligence and the full palette of my heart's expression that opened me to an ever more expansive place of love. Those tools that helped me also through the repair of my body and the reunion of my body and my heart led me to my soul fullness. And that was really what I noticed, that not only I as a young person waking up to what it means to be an adult, but all the young people around me were seeking was, what else is there besides this materialistic, violent at times, disconnected, perhaps unsupportive world around us, where we also saw, we felt a stirring, we were longing for more relationship with each other, with the natural world, and ultimately with something bigger than ourselves. So it was really out of my own need, and then what I saw mirrored around me, that I began my journey of service. And in a funny way, honestly, I was always being myself, even as a child. I was always somehow expressing a longing to come together with other young people or people younger than myself and host meaningful conversations. And the vehicle for doing that changed over time. But as I started to wake up into consciousness, it really became about the body as the doorway to the sacred, to the soul, to the sacred, to my service, and to spirit. And that has moved through many, many iterations of how that shows up in my work in the world. But I'll stop there and have plenty more to say about it. But that's my devotion to helping humanity come back to what is grounded and connected, and to move from that place really underscores all that I do, be it with myself, with youth, or in the cross-cultural bridging that I'm deeply engaged in at this time.
That's wonderful. And I really appreciate that you started with, the change that you wanted to see was about listening to your own experience first, as opposed to sort of the going out and, what am I supposed to do? It was a going in and responding to that which moved you, and then this natural response. I find that hopeful because we can all do that. We can all sink down into our own experience and find those places that we're lost or disconnected or what we witness, and then respond from there. And I do want to come back, Melissa, to talk specifically about some of those actions that you're doing in the world based on that.
Thank you, Susan.
Mm-hmm. Pat, how about you? Would you like to share, what is it that is on your heart that comes out or inspires your action in the world?
Sure. First of all, just thank you for inviting me. I found reflecting on these questions a learning experience. So there you go. The student experience is all through. So thank you for inviting me to do this. I realized in listening to Melissa that I had a bit of an aha around what I was going to say, and that is that it is also grounded in my own work and my own journey. I've spent a good part of the last decade, what I would say, getting free from a system of oppression that I had deeply internalized. And it was messy and it was hard, and I learned a lot through it. And so that has motivated me now to be passionate about helping people wake up from and to systems of oppression, and especially systems of oppression that are part of dominant culture that can be very invisible, that are just like the water that we swim in and the air that we breathe. And so members of dominant culture just don't see those systems at all. And it's become really important for me and exciting work. And I think I do that as part of a ministerial staff and a huge lay team. Mennonites are very much priesthood of all believers. Everybody gets in there, gets their hands dirty and works. So it's not like I'm doing all of these things. I just find myself in a stewardship, guiding leadership place around helping this particular community in itself, but then hopefully rippling out to other communities to start to wake up, to become conscious of these systems. So that involves a lot of pieces. One is an education piece that is both right brain and left brain oriented in the way that we do it. Worship series that explore these systems. Things like, I mean, I'm talking like things that are related to race, related to gender, related to class, related to sexual identity, and then also just the big systems like capitalism and religion. Religion's a big one, and technology. You know, how does technology run our lives? What is that system, and how are we bound by that and oppressed by that, and how are we freed by that? So a lot of education around looking at those issues. But then, of course, it can't stop there, right? It needs to go the next step, because as soon as you start looking at some of those systems, all kinds of emotion comes up. And so there needs to be work around emotions. What are emotions? What are they trying to tell us? What can we learn from them? How do we let them move rather than letting them run us? How do we let them move through? There needs to be a lot of work around trauma awareness and working with trauma, because inevitably that will enter the room the moment that you start, you know, talking about these systems of oppression. Communication skills. How do we talk about hard things together? How do we clean up the messes that inevitably happen when we start looking at some of these issues and start to feel what it feels like to realize we're a part of these systems and we've been perpetrating these systems. Practices, obviously, of contemplation and prayer. You know, how do we cultivate a witnessing mind so that we can step back and, you know, look at the system, but not necessarily feel like it's running us in that particular moment. Shadow work. What are our personal shadows that get activated by this work, and how do those affect corporate shadow or communal shadow? Practices of just learning to be uncomfortable. A lot of people in dominant culture don't like to be uncomfortable. It's, we're not used to it. So how can we be uncomfortable? How can we practice rest and Sabbath? How can we practice celebration? I mean, it's like, it's all of these things. And as I said, I'm not doing all of these. I mean, I have my fingers in a lot of those, but it's a group process that we're all looking at these things and kind of cycling in and out. And then, of course, the last phase is, what are we going to do? How are we going to go out in the world and, you know, do something based on what we've just studied and how we've looked at ourselves? And then we practice doing that something, and then we circle back around to, what did that feel like? What did we learn? What came up for us? What did we learn about ourselves? What did we know? How do we want to act in the world in a way that's in line with our deepest values? You know, what are those deepest values? Are we willing to step out in those deepest values? So, and then that takes us all the way right back around circle to starting all of the education pieces again and the work pieces. So yeah, I can stop there too. I'm happy to talk about one of those actions, but I can, I'm happy to do that at another point as well.
That's a good idea. We'll do a little circle again about action. So, as people have talked about their church communities before, I've never heard a church community articulated like that. I mean, I hear you saying about the education part, the deep experience and awareness, and then the practices that support us when we become aware. And then that action part. I really appreciate how you articulated that. And honestly, that's pretty fresh for saying that this is, how a spiritual community works together. There's certainly a expectation of depth in community and individually when you talk about that. Yeah, and a big commitment.
Yes, there is a big commitment.
Yeah. Well, that sounds amazing. I think, you need to write more about that and share more about that so we can, I think sometimes we have little boxes about what churches or spiritual communities look like. And when people are living outside of those boxes or stretching them further, it's a gift in itself. So you're going to talk about the actions. And I just want to say, even that feels like an action when you're creating a community like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. So Sarita, I'm going to unmute you here and welcome. And I would love for you to share with us what's on your heart and what inspires your, the change that you want to see in the world.
It's interesting. It's very obvious to me as I was reflecting on these questions and thinking about what I would share. It's obvious that I've been deeply in the work with Melissa Michaels, my teacher and mentor, because there's such a resonance with what she shared. And of course, I've been doing work in that field with her for many years now, and it's deeply influenced me. But what I would say is very similar, that my work has been informed by the wounds and the lacks and the gaps in my own cosmology and world and upbringing that has really called forth what is the medicine that I'm longing to bring forward. It really does come from my own initiations, and particularly I think deep initiations into grief, and then alchemizing and moving through and working through that with creative tools, and growing up between two different cultures and finding ways to integrate those worlds and to create some sort of cohesiveness and coherence between the inequity and injustices and huge gaps that I felt and experienced and continue to feel. And I think all of my work has been informed by some of these longings to see us orienting as a whole towards more wholeness. Similarly to what Melissa was sharing, I think, I have been carrying these threads of medicine and the work that I'm doing now through Youth Rites of Passage, through embodiment with Golden Bridge, and surfing the creative. It's kind of all of these threads of global dialogue and community and youth empowerment through the arts, through movement, through embodiment. They're all, it's like this tapestry that's come together in this really beautiful way and meets many of those needs that I've been feeling the world calling me to cultivate in myself. And so, in short, yeah, I think the big threads that are in my heart right now and have been for many years are about helping, that change that we're wanting to see. I think it's about helping us, each and all of us, to orient instead of to these systems of oppression, or just systems that actually don't have our wholeness and our sacred truth, and knowing that are not attuned to that and are not honoring that, for us to each be coming back to our wholeness. And in that, from that place, I think is where we each get guided to do our piece of the puzzle. There's so much work to be done. There's so much brokenness, and there's so much health and guidance in us to help us do that. So it's all about, like both of these amazing women that I love and respect have already spoken about. It's about how do we come back to that center,
Right.
and to that guidance in ourselves.
Right. Well, I think you expressed that so well, and I really appreciate you talk about having this come from a sense of woundedness or experience of woundedness, and I like that you used the word, what is the medicine, that the world needs, what is the medicine for that, that brings us towards wholeness. And it reminds me, of the people who have written about the wounded healer, and that it's through that wound that we become healers and have those gifts to offer. And when I listen to the messages really from all three of you, what I appreciate is that sometimes we have this longing or vision. I mean, the world is so hurt. I appreciate, Sarita, that you said it's so hurt, and there's so many gifts and wholeness too. It's both. But sometimes it feels overwhelming, like what all these things that how we could make a difference. And the idea that really by listening to our own experiences, our own unique, that we were born in these bodies in these times, and because of that, we have our own unique experience, and creating from that, I think gives people a sense of hope, like who can't. Pat, you talked about helping people be, not be sleepwalking, be awake, so who can't. I mean, that's something that we can do, is to return to ourselves, to wake up and to find what those individual gifts are, and then create from there. That just feels a little bit more like, like doable, in a world that sometimes feels like we can get pretty overwhelmed. So thank you for pointing that medicine out. I appreciate that. How about if we go around one more time, and you all just identify, an action, a way, something that, out of this process you birthed, if you could just articulate one thing, that maybe feels like, Pat, you said, here's an action. Maybe Pat, you could start. So we'll come back and I'll share an action that we did.
Sure, I'm happy to start. So on Martin Luther King Day weekend, there were a number of actions going on. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there were a number of actions that were sort of in line with that weekend, as there always are. And we decided to design our own. And we kind of went with the idea of what do we love doing? What are we really comfortable doing that might make others uncomfortable? Just enough that, we want them to sort of wake up and sort of like go, oh. And so for Mennonites, that's singing. Mennonites are big 4-part a cappella hymn singers, have been for hundreds of years. And our congregation is no different. And this is a congregation of all ages, from youth. I mean, I think at this action, we had our youngest person there was about 9, and our oldest person was probably 60. So it was a whole range of people. And we specifically targeted the action around 2 ballot issues that are coming up that are very important. Both of them have to do with housing in the Bay Area and funding for schools. And both of these ballot measures we're trying to get on the ballot for November. Both could have a huge effect in terms of lowering loopholes in corporations, so that more money flows into the public arena. And there's a lot of resistance around these, and banks are among the biggest resistors around these, closing these loopholes. So we took a bunch of hymns, some which were beloved hymns, like things we often went to, ones that we loved the music, but but the lyrics were like, doesn't quite fit anymore. So we threw out the lyrics and we wrote new lyrics. And we created a songbook of about 15 songs. This was a community kind of event that everybody, you know, we got together in groups and everybody just did it. It was amazing, like creativity. In an hour, we had 15 songs.
Wow.
We entered them all into Sibelius and created scores out of them and put them together into a book. And then we went out caroling, basically. We went to banks. We went to 3 banks one morning and we stood in their lobbies and we sang these songs. And our point was to get them to actually fax a list of requests to their headquarters around these, closing these loopholes and supporting these ballot initiatives. And it was fun. You know, the first bank we went to, the security guards got really angry. They called the police on us immediately. It brought up a lot of stuff in everybody and we had to process that later. It's like, oh, what's it like to make everyone feel uncomfortable? We're feeling really uncomfortable now. There was a really interesting conversation with one of the little boys who was just like, they're telling us to leave and we're not leaving. And in my world, when adults tell children to leave, like we have to do that. So what's the difference here? And so that sparked this really wonderful, rich conversation. So, and now we have a songbook and it's only March. And our hope is to go out to farmers markets and places like that and raise awareness now with that songbook and get signatures to put it on the ballot. And then also just get people to vote yes on these initiatives when we get there.
Wow, that's so creative. I really want to put you on the spot and ask if you have a piece of that song. I mean, there's lyrics attached to hymns that impact a bank. You know, I'm just dying of curiosity to know what one sounds like.
Sure, there was one. Why don't you come back to me? Let me pull it up. I can sing you a chorus of one.
Okay, I know you would. You're so talented that way. So think of those words as they come back.
Okay.
Melissa, would you like to share something that, you know, is a sort of a concrete action out of, you know, that work that you've done and been inspired to do?
Sure. I think one of the hallmarks of what I've been up to is to create safe spaces for very diverse individuals to come together and navigate their way through narrow passageways. And that can be through adolescence, initiating and working with young people, initiating them, helping them heal, learn the skills and the values that will help them grow into productive adulthood, and giving them experiences that allow them to mobilize into that next phase of their lives. Or it could be creating safe spaces for people going through life crises, be it the death of a major community leader. We've done that work in this community, or when the floods happened, or even after this big election. So I feel like that's kind of a hallmark, is how to bring people together from very different, who are having different experiences, often having a traumatic response to what's happening in their lives, and to give them a way to unwind that trauma and actually move into more connection both with themselves and one another, so that they can collectively move through whatever the life cycle transition or life crisis is that's happening in their lives. So that's a huge part of what I've been up to. And around the world, actually, I'm thinking, and I'll give you one solid example. When I was teaching in Durban, South Africa, a certain number of years ago, all of a sudden, and we'd done a lot of movement, we'd done a lot of unwinding trauma by tracking sensation and a lot of ceremony, and we were really beginning to work with the emotional body. And there was so much grief in that room. And these were Black, white, and colored South Africans, which never gather together, or rarely gather together, and certainly not for ceremony, communion, and sort of breaking down to break through and really bringing their shared medicine together. And there was so much collective grief that surprised us all, but really didn't, around the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And we ended up doing incredible many-day-long processes that allowed so much joy and so much freedom and so much connection to arise out of finally having a safe space to really come together and talk about, as Pat so beautifully spoke about, the whole systemic oppression that was really causing them all to be experiencing this epidemic, and then how that impacted each of them in a very personal way, and how they interpersonally, through the somatic work, having freed up so much space within them, could then move into dialogue about how they could collaborate going forward. So it was really about just having the audacity and some tools and a deep devotion to peace, actually, inner and outer, that caused me to catalyze that healing and those conversations.
Well, that is so powerful. I mean, I feel, just even imagining it is pretty powerful, frankly, and I think the idea of rites of passage, it is so foreign, unfortunately, to our general culture. I think in some of our religious traditions, I know, I've been to some there you go.
Bar mitzvah.
Thank you.
All good.
It's always nice when you're on, live on Facebook, and I can't speak. But I've been to, and as a non-Jewish person, I was like, wow, look at all the work that's gone through this rite of passage for this person 13 going on to, it was so powerful. And then I look at my own tradition and say, where are those rites of passage? Where, just even for normal healthy planning of going into, like you said, a narrow passageway, but then all of those things that you mentioned, a death in the community, a flood, epidemic, and to not have something that people can come together to, and for you do it in such a bodied way, and through dance, through movement, through that expression, as well as other creative pieces, but really crafting that ritual that helps people go through. And gosh, I'm so a little bit speechless about how powerful that is and how needed. In the cosmic mass, there's that's celebrated through creation spirituality, that ritual, there's often a grieving aspect where we really honor the via negativa, that's part of our existence. And but that's a tiny little part in a big ceremony, and something that we need so much. So I appreciate that example. Very powerful.
Thank you, Susan.
So Sarita, do you have something that I unmuted you. Do you have something that an experience or something that an action that you've put out there that you would like to share with us?
Sure. I think the thing that's the most alive in this moment is something that is happening right in this moment. I will be releasing my second book on this Saturday. I'm having a celebration and ritual to release that. And that the writing of that book and now sharing it is an action in my framework. I experienced a pretty traumatic loss of my partner 5 years ago in an accident, and was very blessed to have a lot of community around me, including, the Golden Bridge community, which has now helped me with the publishing of the book. But before that, even the narrow passageway of being in an initiation that was really had me fighting for my life and just to orient towards life in that kind of devastation. And what I know to be true about the creative process and the mystery that can work through us and work with us wherever we are, led me to go out into the desert for a very long time and write with support from my community. And it's been a 5-year-long process and is finally coming to fruition in this moment. And this book is is really, and I wrote it to save myself, really. I needed to write it for myself, but it's now taken form as an offering to give some kind of hope. And yeah, I think it's hope to others that through expression, through staying with ourselves and understanding that when we're obliterated, we may just be in an initiation, and likely are.
Right.
So that there can be a larger arc that's holding us in
Mhm.
the process. And so it's really, it's testament to my own experience, and hopefully will be some kind of a balm and a companion to other people who are really suffering. But it also honors my deep belief in creative expression as a way through. So.
I love that. And I love that that really what you're saying is that telling your own story is an action, you know, and so yours is in book form. It took a lot of process and discipline to birth that book. But the fact that we can tell our story and have that be the thing, the medicine that the world needs, that's pretty powerful.
Thank you.
Okay, Pat, on the spot.
All right. I got one.
Okay.
So this is, I'll just sing you the first verse and the chorus. This is a hymn called Come Let Us All Unite to Sing. And it's about Prop 13, which I think probably, you know, the nation knows about Prop 13 in California. And it's about reforming 13 so that there are fewer loopholes for the corporations. And the hashtags that we're doing are Make It Fair. It's Make It Fair. So you'll hear that in there. So that's the context. So here we go. Come, let us all unite to vote Reform 13. Let corporations pay their share, Reform 13. There are too many loopholes. We lose our libraries and schools. Come vote with us for justice sake, Reform 13. Make it fair, hashtag. Make it fair, hashtag. Come, let us all unite to vote to make it fair.
Oh man, that is fabulous. That is great. Thank you so much. That is
So imagine
so
it,
creative.
imagine it in 4-part harmony, and the men
Yes.
get the hashtag.
Yes. And just imagine, you know, a Mennonite choir in, you know, the lobby of a bank singing that song. I hope you videoed it.
We did.
Good. Good. That's fabulous. Well, the next question that we pose to you is, what empowers you to do the work? What empowers you? Anybody want to jump on that one, or should I call on you?
I'll jump.
Okay.
I just want to say what just happened here empowers me. Listening to Sarita share her story, because I've been so close to it for a good minute,
Mm-hmm.
those 5 years and more, just really brought my heart so wide open, and remembering the grief and being so proud of you, Sarita, and so honored to bear witness and to be such an integral part of your becoming. And now you're totally stepping out, and just feeling the tenderness of that, and kind of in my own grief. And then Pat, you come along and you're just singing, you know, it's just like bringing so much joy, bringing us right out of that grief into like, okay, we're going to come together. And even though it's messy and we don't like what's happening, we're going to come together and bring our hearts right out front. We're not going to hide them. So one of the things that brings me out is the magic and the consistent order that arises out of chaos if we really let ourselves go in there. And in that moment, it was a moment of grief that just shifted right into to joy. And so that's one of the things that brings me out, is just like the the constant capacity that we as human beings have to transform our pain into medicine, to transform to reconnect after disconnection, dysregulation, and to come together when we fall apart. So that's one of the things. And I just love being a part of that. I love facilitating that. I love catalyzing the critical breakdowns that open us into breakthrough, and really being in the collective, the individual and collective transformational process. It turns me on. and I'm really comfortable there. And I love to bear witness and like I said, be a catalyst and a midwife essentially for the birthing of individual and collective souls through through transitions and such. So that's one thing. And then I want to speak to one other piece that really brings me out, which is I love what happens when we open ourselves to whatever you want to call it, spirit, grace, the creative force. And when we're really grounded, which for some of us took a lot of hard work over many decades to sort of sew the fabric of our beings into a strong enough container and a container that can sustain the brightness and the brilliance of the God force or the goddess force. I love that energy when it moves through me, and to be able to bring that and have that be a healing force and an inspiration and a transformational force, not only outside, but within, really calls me out. And I love communion basically. And one of the places where that happens for me is in the public, in the work, when I'm being called out. I tend to get more easily out of the way and have that sweet surrender, and love it.
You exude it. I love that when you're talking about how you're empowered, you're speaking the words, but you're expressing it, and that sense of empowerment. And I love that you said that it comes out even more when you're out in public, that when you're doing the work, the spirit comes, the communion happens. So it's sort of like, oh, yeah. What were you going to say?
I have one more thing to say.
Okay.
Something that calls me out is the opportunity to keep growing. And Pat, you so eloquently spoke about the complexity of working with community in the truth of what is happening and what has happened over time for humanity, and to sit in the tension and to be in the hard conversations and to constantly be called forth to become a better version of myself, and to be learning and to be humbled and to be revising and being cooked essentially in the collective bonfire that we're all in right now, is really part of what calls me out. Is that.
That's wonderful.
Thanks.
Being called out, empowered and called out. I like that language.
Thank you.
How about you, Pat? What is it that empowers you to do your work?
Well, it's interesting. Sarita knows this. We just shared a class together last month that partly through the work at FICS, I'm being called more and more deeply into my own faith tradition. It has been easy for me as an adult to shy away from Christianity. It's even though I work in it, it's there's a big shadow side to Christianity, a huge shadow side. And so it's been, I realize that I'm being called to even more deeply explore what speaks to me, and to wrestle with what doesn't, and what I find that is shadow and that needs to be transformed. So when I say what motivates me, it's a little surprising even to me, but it's true. So in the Christian tradition, we've just been through Easter, right? And if you're an Orthodox, we're sort of in between. That's coming up. And for me, the resurrection is actually very, very, very powerful, and not in a specific story way, but rather in I view the resurrection sort of like I view the kingdom of God, that it is already here. The resurrection happens all the time. It is that creative birthing. And we have a choice. We can participate in that, or we can choose to not. And when we do participate in it, it is making the choices for new life, for creativity to happen. And it is a joyous call to, so it, you know, as you said, for this webinar, to step up and step out. It is choosing life. And that is always available to us. And it is the central part of the Christian faith, that there is this dying that happens, dying to self, dying to systems, dying to whatever. And then there is this new life that can rise up out of that. And so I keep calling myself back to that story again and again and again. And to choose to step up and step out is to choose to collaborate with resurrection that is already here, that is going on, right? And for me, that's choosing life. And why wouldn't I do that?
Right. That's really beautiful. And I really appreciate, because I think in creation spirituality, there's a lot of people like yourself that may, you know, that are trying to understand the Christian tradition that they came from, and what work there needs to be for themselves, you know, or their communities, to make that those stories, that faith more vital. So I really appreciate how you articulated it in a way that's really accessible too and present. It's important work.
Thank you.
Yes, I have to say, you know, I haven't, it's in panel conversations and discussions, we've had many, you know, amongst creation spirituality folks, to be able to sort of unapologetically and yet, you know, to articulate with thought and mind and heart that, and do that hard work. I think it's a unique thing.
Thank you.
Rita, how about you? What empowers you?
Well, I think there's so much to say about this, and a lot of it's already been said. But what's coming to me in this moment is just that, you know, when we talk about how do we find the courage or the strength to stand up for something, or to speak up for something, or to move, you know, in service of something, it's, to me, the kind of back to what I was talking about a little earlier, about this knowing that if we are all connected to our wholeness and to source in ourselves, that the guidance and the fuel is there, and the wisdom to move forward, and what is our piece to carry and to offer. It's almost as if, you know, when we're coming from that heart space and inspired in that way, I feel that for me, I'm not standing for something, I'm standing as something, and I'm speaking as it. Like, I am connected to truth and to wholeness, and so there isn't space to be in integrity with injustice and inequity and and separation, and also be in that. And so again, I think it comes back to this practice of evoking and invoking that wholeness, and letting that truth be, and then we can just get out of our own ways and not be.
That's right. I like that. I like the that sense that there's not space, that if we're in our wholeness in spirit, you know, connected to that sense, that there's no space between us and it in order to be in injustice. That's powerful, really, you know. So doing the work of being in that sense of wholeness and letting that spirit that's in and out, to be, what we're embodied in, that it itself, I'm very visual, so I'm just sort of seeing that, like when you're right in that, there is no way to be in that and in injustice at the same time. So that's powerful. That's empowering. So I'm gonna pose our next question. Thank you, you guys. You're just really, I'm really enjoying this. Can we do it next week too? I think it's just fabulous. And this is why the school is so, exciting, is because these kinds of dialogues, these people come together, and the dialogues that happen, and the spirit that works for people to tell their story and live into that story, happens. And it's really why I'm passionate about the school. FICS Institute. So I'm going to pose that question. I just want to tell the folks that are watching that if you want to put a question at the bottom, there's a question and answer. We're happy to answer those questions also. So the next question is, how is education? We know that FICS Institute education is, its pedagogy or style of education is, very right and left brain. People are doing the academic seminar in the mornings, and they're doing arts as meditation, different practices to get in their body, sort of let go of their mind for that part in the afternoon, and then integrating it afterwards in that integration group. So it's an embodied right brain, left brain education. And everything you guys have been talking about is that. You're talking about even your actions, are actions that are creative and practice oriented. But just in general, Pat and Sarita, you're, in the FICS Institute's education program. And, I'd be curious about what you think as far as how education's helping you to be the change that you want to be in the world. And Melissa, you have taught so much, but you've also studied a lot in order to be, that guide and that teacher and that mentor. So maybe while Sarita and Pat are thinking about how the school itself or their experience of education is helping them, maybe you might say, historically, how education has empowered and worked, been effective for you. And I'm going to get you unmuted again. You're so, there you go.
Okay. Well, I talk about being embodied research, body-centered researchers with my students and in my work. And for a long time, I was always orienting towards not what we think about things, but how we actually have, how we know things. And I heard so much powerful talk. And I grew up going to schools where people were incredibly intelligent, but I was so emotionally disconnected and enraged, basically, that I couldn't think clearly. And I had so much trauma in my system that I didn't know how to work with my emotions, how to express myself, or how to actually sit still and learn. So for me, education had to start outside of the formal classroom. Sure, I went to school, I went to college, I actually started off in engineering, and that's a whole long story. But really, it was when I realized that we could be body-centered learners, that something started to open up in me. And I realized that as I said at the beginning, that the body, by really unwinding the trauma and befriending the emotional landscape and having ways to express that and explore that and express that, be it, more privately or a more therapeutic way through the expressive arts, or more, like Sarita just did in her writing, or I recently did in a book that I've just completed also. It's really then that the mind can start, the thinking can get clear and free. And so I'm a deep devotee of integrative education, basically, and all systems on deck. And when I did my doctoral work, they said you weren't on the cutting edge, Melissa, you were on the bleeding edge. I just kept really bringing all theories, and how can it be brought down into, how can it be translated into practice and practical learning opportunities. And because I worked and have worked so extensively with children and youth, I would always simplify things so much and then find ways to bring it through that drew upon all facets of their body mind. So I think that's just a little piece of it, but I will say one more thing. I do think that Rudolf Steiner, who's been a huge influence in my life, talked about that the folks that came of age in the 60s brought their initiatives through the heart forces, and we see heart math and nonviolent communications and things like that. The folks that came of age just prior to that brought their initiatives through in a thinking way, through thoughts. And the folks that came of age after that, and he was speaking, this was, it wasn't him speaking it, but it was his theories being applied to these times. The folks that came of age in the 90s brought their initiatives through in the will. And we see that now. It's all about action and right action. And really the way to educate the will is actually through the body. And you can't think your way into your will. You can't feel your way into it, although those are really important. And we don't just want to be impulsive people. We want to really have that sweet marriage of the body, heart, and the mind, so that we can actually have that sacred union that we call our soul, and move from there. So that's a little glimmer. And I think that, yeah, I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I like the all systems on deck, that you have to bring all systems on deck. And how do we do that in education? I know that that's a real commitment to Fox Institute, that we don't want people leaving their minds behind. We don't want people leaving their bodies behind. That's what practice is about. Their spirits, bringing the wholeness, not just in theory, but in practice. Like, how do we actually do that? What you were going to say? You had one more thing.
Just one more thing, really briefly. I work with this concept that we talk about called embodied empathy, which is really, if we're going to be living on the cross, where we are really working to be in communion with something greater than ourselves and the earth beneath our feet and humanity in this horizontal plane, to be able to actually feel them. And Sarita's just spoke to that, to actually be able to have an experience of ourselves in relationship or in communion with the other. We can't just be thinking about them. We have to be willing to feel them and to actually step into their experience, and not just in a mental way. And I think from that place, then we can come into right relationship and service that is truly attuned.
That's perfect. That's so well said. Thank you. How about Pat? How do you say education? And we're gonna, shift here in about 5 minutes and invite Kip and Caroline to sort of share about Fox Institute's education program. But I just want to hear, especially as a doctoral student at Fox Institute, how is it helping you, or what's in your stepping up and stepping out?
I have always been more of a left brain learner, more of a right brain learner, and more intuitive. And I wouldn't say that I've struggled in school. I haven't. So it's not so far kind of off the spectrum, so to say, but I have felt different most of my life. And I've actually internalized a fair amount of shame around it, I realized, as I was pondering this question around my intuitive knowing is actually very, very strong. I had someone say to me recently, you need to get out of your head and drop more into your heart. And I thought, wow, that's the first time I've ever been told that in my life. Usually it's the other way around, you know? So, I am a teacher. My training is all in the arts. My training is as a pianist, as a musician. So that was very much reinforced through all of my formal training. And then my work was always working with musicians and working with artists. And I developed my own ways of teaching embodied education and working with musicians at all levels, from children up through adults and, higher education and whatnot. So I've been very at home in that realm. And part of why I wanted to do this doctoral work was to be able to be more articulate about what I know intuitively and artistically, and what I can express artistically, because the world needs that. We have to be able to speak about it as well. Mm-hmm. And so it's at a place like FICS, I feel very much at home. All the shame disappears. I'm able to just sort of be who I am, and then also really allow myself to be challenged around how am I going to articulate and write and wrestle with hard concepts and be able to speak in the world and find my voice in the world.
Love that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. It's sort of like it's the preface really to putting the story out there. We talked about how our work can be telling our story, and sometimes education requires us to do that hard work of narrating the story, Right. I used to say that to folks that did expressive therapies in psychiatric settings. They were very unique and offering, body-centered and art. And it was such a new thing in the 80s and the early 90s that there were all these very left brain physicians and clinicians and, looking askance at these creative therapists. And, when folks would intern, the ability to articulate what they were doing in this world made them, in that hospital world, in that place in which people weren't exposed to as much right brain experience, made their work so much more powerful and so much more invited. So I really appreciate that discipline of having to be able to articulate ourselves. But you, Sarita, you're working on your master's at Fox Institute, and I'm curious about how you see education, supporting the work that you're doing in the world. There you go.
Yeah, the term education in kind of the classical sense is not one that I have resonated with. In the past, institutional learning, I think Matthew Fox says that we need wisdom schools. Is that what it's?
Wisdom schools, right.
Rather than something factories. I don't remember. I shouldn't try to quote him, but yeah, I've been really refreshed, and I'm kind of rewiring my sense of what formal education can be through my experience with the Fox Institute. And it's really exciting and interesting to be in a setting that can truly honor and be inside a mold that fits somewhere. It somehow has found its way to be an institution, and yet doesn't represent what that has always meant to me, which is actually disempowering, disembodying, and kind of helping people to believe in one way. I really feel that education should be about helping people to tap into the many pathways towards information and towards knowing and knowledge and wisdom. And I'm really inspired and excited to be in a space that can really challenge my mind and help me, keep distilling and articulating and crystallizing my thoughts and understanding, and to have my cohort, my peers, challenge me and enrich my thinking, and it's really, it's challenging and wonderful. And then the format allows for so much integration time and for those other pieces of our intelligence, those other systems to be on deck and called forth as most.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm living into that question as
Right.
and enjoying myself.
Well, I appreciate that, because I also hope that education is an empowering element, so, whereas we do our work in the world and we're articulating our stories, and sometimes, it is through, oftentimes people start a program like at Fox Institute, with bringing their gifts and not exactly knowing what it's going to look like, towards the end of the degree or towards the end of the dissertation or thesis. And but our hope is that we are empowering leaders. And I think that's where the collaboration, which we're excited about with Golden Bridge and Melissa, and bringing youth that have gone through these rites of passage, our leaders in their communities, and helping them and supporting them and equipping them with that formal education that helps make another bridge into the world, as far as leadership, empowerment, and authority, that maybe other doors open for our students. That's certainly what we want to help happen. Well, I really want to thank you, beautiful women. And I just want to, say that we missed Adam and his beautiful woman wife working in the legislature there in Nebraska. And he couldn't join us, so that he was working and helping with childcare while she's helping with the government. And this is just the reality of all of our lives, and sharing with our partners and our friends, their work in the world too. I'm going to add Carol Bennington, our Dean of Students, and Kip Hubbard, our Director of Outreach, back onto the video. And so just wanted to let you, Carol, I sent you a thing. There you go. Oh, there, you guys are together on the video. That's right. I was like, I don't know, I lost Kip's connection. That's because you guys are on the same screen. There you go. There he is. He's hiding.
We work as a team.
That's right. It looks like you're in the kitchen together, but we can let people know that that's our gathering space there at the Fox Institute. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody. I want to especially thank all the panelists for sharing and being part of it, of this conversation, as well as being part of the school. One of the things I love most, well, it's hard to choose, there are many things, but one of them is the community that is formed during intensives and beyond. So I just want to welcome our audience. I am so happy to talk to people. So we put our contact information on the chat there, but we have really a new incredible line of courses that we just posted to the website. And I invite you to check that out. And so we still have our spring courses and as well as our summer courses up now. And I'm happy to talk about application process, the registration process, what's the school, and just anyways. So you can either email me or call me or email me and say, let me know when a good time is to contact you. But I'm so excited to talk about the school, having experienced this system of education and knowing what it can do and challenge. As an educator, I'm so excited that this is engaged transformational education. So whether you're interested in a degree program or wanting to do a certificate or audit and for a lifelong education, I welcome you and contact me because I love talking about it. So I'd love to talk to you.
Thank you, Carol. Kip, I'd like for you to do a song for us when we close.
Well, the earth is good to me. That's from Waldorf. But anyway, I am the director of outreach and communications at the Fox Institute. And I have to say, I also so appreciate the three of you being here with us today. It really articulates the essence of the Fox Institute so well to hear both faculty and students talking about their experiences and also what you're doing in the world. And it helps me to articulate that to, the larger, global audience of people who may be interested in joining us. It's so important. I am excited because starting next week, I start going on the road a little bit more. I'll be at the Shepherd Symposium for Social Justice up in Laramie, Wyoming next week. And in 2.5 weeks, I'll be going to the Spiritual Directors International Conference in St. Louis called Seeking Connection. And if anybody out there is going to be there, we will have an information table. And I hope you'll stop by and say hello. Also, Poria, who's not with us tonight, who is our registrar, will be at the Creation Spirituality Communities Gathering in Asheville, North Carolina. And that's the same weekend as the Spiritual Directors Conference, which is April 24th through the 26th through the 29th, sorry. If anybody has questions or out there in the audience has any questions or wants to share any information that they think other people would want to know about, please contact me at the email on the chat here or give me a call.
Right. And if they're watching on Facebook, they can put messages on the comments there and we can respond to that too.
Great.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you, Kip and Carol, and thank you for being there in Boulder and holding down the fort. Appreciate that.
It's our pleasure.
Yes. And I just really want to thank our guests for really an inspiring conversation. I'm really grateful for it. I think it renews my sense of calling with regards to education that's transformative, that helps people do that work in the world, which is the internal work. It can't be done without the internal process and the practice. And so having that real commitment to that. One of the chat people had asked about our thoughts about contemplative education. And I feel like that's what the arts is meditation in the afternoon is about. So even if it's that we're dancing or we're drumming or we're chanting or we're doing Tai Chi or the variety of different kinds of arts as meditation, it's all about, stilling that reptilian brain, coming down into that place of silence and solitude, even in a community. And so for the Fox Institute, it's a real commitment of our pedagogy for people to do all three of you really talked about that, whether it's about awakening and doing the emotional work that goes with it before the action piece. And so the contemplative aspect is a significant part of our program and our intention, and for that deep listening to happen. So I thought that was a great question and appreciate that. So we're coming to a close of our webinar and our time. And if there were any last comments or thoughts that you wanted to share, we can, I open that up to our wonderful panelists. Then I'll end with, one of the quotes we started with during I love that we started with way too much technical problems and all kinds of crazy things were happening. And then as soon as everybody got into their hearts and their voice, there could be no distortion, problems and kinds of things. It is sort of the way that we are in the world. And it just felt like we were so present. I was, you all were so present in your sharing. And that feels like 100 years ago that we were trying to get on and having, all kinds of craziness. I was having feedback. I think Facebook was on at the same time that I was talking. So I'd say something for a sentence and it was coming back. So anybody watches the beginning of that, that's what was happening. Any words of closing?
I would say something. This education is fabulous. And if you're out there wondering whether it's for you, I say, give it a try. register for a class, come see. The colleagues are amazing. The teachers are fabulous. You'll be challenged and stretched in ways you hadn't known, but also deeply supported through all of that work in ways that you also can't imagine. So give it a try.
Thank you, Pat. That's so kind. Thank you.
I also want to just really put a strong moment of honoring for what you have done, Susan, in creating this school and gathering your colleagues to help make it happen. And it was an act of faith and an act of great vision. And just in the short time that I've known Pat and in the long time that I've known Sarita, I'm moved and by what has happened in terms of the synthesis of their ideas and their ways and their being, how powerful these individuals are becoming through this process that you've made possible for them. And I know they were already very powerful, but I can just see an incredible synthesis happening and a weaving together of their many threads of their lives to create a more cohesive whole and a more empowered leadership. And so I'm honored to be a part of it, but I really want to honor you, Susan, and your colleagues for the risk and the bravery and the steadfastness, because it takes that. And the investment is great. And I see that. So thank you.
No, thank you so much, Melissa. So kind. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sarita, any closing words?
I'd also just love to thank you all for the space that you're holding and the opportunity you're providing, and such an honor to be here with Pat and Melissa as fellow panelists, and just to be with the whole community. Thank you for creating this opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you. What a joy. So we had this quote that I really, I just want to end. We started with the Mahatma Gandhi quote and Michelle Obama quote. Interesting combination there. And I just want to finish with that Michelle Obama quote that we just sent out in one of our newsletters, because I love the end of it. It says, "You may not always have a comfortable life, and you will not always be able to solve all the problems of the world at once. But don't ever underestimate the importance you can have, because history has shown us that courage can be contagious and hope can take on a life of its own." And I just want to, bow to the courage and hope and strength that was presented here on this panel. Thank you so, so much.
Thank
Have
you.
a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Sure. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
And thank you.